This is greytFM, a podcast series by Great HR, produced by Timber Media.
Welcome back to greytFM, everyone. I'm your host, Ahalya, and today we're shifting our focus to a region brimming with potential, the Middle East. Every report we've been reading in the past decade or so suggests that the workforce landscape there is really evolving at an incredible pace, presenting both unique challenges and, of course, opportunities for HR leaders. So today we're going to dive deep into how HR can use agile strategies that enable long-term growth, sustained success, because that is very important, right? We don't want a temporary solution. We're looking for permanent solutions, and can create a truly encouraging workplace for the dynamic workforce at hand. You know, with any rapidly transforming environment, it's always critical to proceed with caution and craft HR strategies that are both effective and responsible. It's something we talk about a lot on the podcast series, so I'm glad to be doing it today as well, with the help of course, an expert speaker who comes to us in the form of Kunal Wadhwani, former CHRO at Choithrams. Hello, Kunal. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Hi, Ahalya. Thank you for having me on board. It's an absolute honor.
Pleasure's all ours. And before I dive into the questions and start shooting them your way, let me quickly set the context of all of the amazing experience that you join us with today. 24 years of experience aligning human capital strategies with business goals, which is always such an integral part of successful HR. You've been known throughout your career for creating boundary-less organizational structures, and have also led cultural transformations by designing HR processes really tailored to business needs, which have obviously resulted in some award-winning initiatives, that have boosted both productivity and impacted meaningfully brand reputation, right? So let's get started with the basics, Kunal. What does agility really mean in the HR context, and why is it particularly critical in the rapidly evolving Middle Eastern workforce landscape? And I ask this question simply because I feel like HR has to be agile all the time, 24/7. It's the one function that has to keep up with the times like nobody else. So how does an HR function approach agility in a way that's different from the rest of the business?
So, at the outset, Ahalya, I must say, when you give an introduction like that, it is very nostalgic, I could think of so many things that have happened in the last 15 years when I have been associated to the organization. And coming back to your thought process associated to agility, it's quite strange that we expect everything to be very agile. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the true meaning of agility, it's all about being nimble, things need to move very quickly. But at the same point in time, from a philosophical context, if I may say so, we always talk about change is the only constant, but it should be slow. Too much of change in a hasty way would, disrupt the environment. So sometimes the context of agility is misunderstood. Are we trying to say that we need to be very agile because we were never agile before? When times change, technological interventions happen and new technologies come in. Today, I'm sure, whether it is me, whether it is you or anybody that we know, we all talk about the AI intervention in our personal lives, in our organizational lives. And I think from an agility perspective, what is very critical to understand is that how AI is actually going to help us. All right. Sometimes when we implement technology in today's time, to construe that we are being agile in our processes, whether it is HR, whether it is operations, it's important to do a pre-process mapping of what we expect this agility to bring on table. Because if we don't do that, what happens is everybody talks about being agile, but then the outcomes are either similar or worse in a way. So for me, when I assess the environment in today's time, I think competition is increasing. Once upon a time, and because I come from retail and FMCG background, once upon a time, we were the first ever supermarket to be launched in UAE in 1974. Right. There was hardly any competition, right? But as time has gone by, other competition, other different formats of retail within the same food domain have come in. And everybody takes a little bit of piece of your margin away from you. So when we talk about being agile in today's time, we have to assess how competition was different earlier compared to now, and hence accordingly we will decide the definition of agility associated to our industry, our organization and our domain, very specifically within the organization, to determine how we compete to keep our margins intact in today's time. That's my initial thought on agility.
Very interesting. And just at the risk of sounding a little too cheeky, it sounds like the definition for agile needs to be agile and nimble as well. So there is that. It's quite a meta situation for us, but no, makes a lot of sense because you do really have to assess what you're working with. And I don't think any one business operates the same as another. So of course, how can the HR function operate exactly the same as well, right? Now, the conversation around the Middle East is particularly interesting because of the added context of, the region's nationalization goals, right? Yes. How does this sort of, add to the workplace strategies that you're going to be putting in place? I'm quite interested in understanding that better.
Well, I reckon right now that things from a nationalization context are much, much better compared to what it used to be. I think there was a lot of ambiguity in the initial stages, and especially when in 2022, the new regulation came in, where the new plan is to achieve a higher nationalization ratio. I'm specifically talking about UAE right now. Mm-hmm. I think there was a lot of mental conflict going around, but the way younger generation of locals within the Middle East, the way they are investing in their own education, their own communication enhancement, I think these are things that is just going to help the organizations of today and future. I personally believe some countries have privileges, okay, with regards to their own population segment. And because I come from India, I can give you a classic example over there. If I want certain social benefits in my own country, the population is really huge. Okay. Even if the country tries to do something about it, there will be a certain amount of limitations. But then, we come into this kind of an environment in the Middle East where the government is trying to take a lot of initiatives to support the local community over there. Gone are the days when it was all about government supporting people. Today, people are enhancing their skills, whether it is education, whether it is training and development, whether it is learning new skills or technology for that matter. And I think this whole assessment of self-development in the locals is changing the organizational environment in today's time. So I think I am for nationalization in a way. It's all about supporting the government with their initiatives, supporting the local community. And in return, I think those people who follow the nationalization concepts and targets that are given by the government supports the organization in terms of monetary and fiscal perspectives associated to visas and all those things as well, right? So there are tiers that are developed. I think if these things are utilized from a benefit perspective, from a transformation perspective, then those things are absolutely fine. And when I look at the GCC context today, the only difference in this flavor is that some countries in GCC, they may have lesser local population. So you have a lesser ratio of hiring locals in those countries compared to, let's say, countries like Saudi Arabia or Oman, where, there is a higher chunk of local population. Then the hiring percentage for localization may differ from country to country. But I think the beauty is the locals are developing themselves. They are focusing on getting themselves coached. They are open to learning from expats as well for that matter. And I think there's a good cross exchange that is happening in today's time that I see. And I've been in the region for the last 15 years. So I can safely say that I have seen the erstwhile side of nationalization versus the modern nationalization. And I think it is way too different.
Nice. Okay. Very useful to have that context in our back pocket while we continue the conversation, Kunal, because I think at this point, right, given the new policies in place, it's an interesting time for HR functions, HR professionals in the Middle East then, right? Because you now have to start walking this line between the overarching goal of nationalization and also building policies that at the same time foster a diverse and inclusive workplace. And now I'm not talking just about people from different geographies, different cultures. I'm also talking about the general need for diverse thinking, right? We all come from different walks of life, and it only benefits. I think we've seen that. It's been proven now that a diverse set of people always contributes positively to the workplace. So how do you suggest that HR professionals walk that line and, achieve both?
I may sound very unconventional, Ahalya, when I say this. I don't necessarily think nationality or gender should be seen as a source of diversification anymore. I think we have been speaking about having a secure space for gender inclusiveness. We have been speaking about nationalization inclusion as well for a very, very long time, and years have gone by speaking about this. Today, if you actually look at the industry data, okay, there is so much of talent shortage across the globe. Okay, I'm not just talking about Middle East, I'm talking about across the globe. So if all the countries across the globe are talking about, inclusion, diversity, then why should talent shortage exist? We never think about it, right? So from the perspective of DEI at the moment, the core focus should shift to generational inclusivity.
Okay.
The talent shortage is not associated to gender inclusion or nationality inclusion. It is purely associated because the younger generation thinks otherwise of the baby boomers, and the baby boomers think that the younger generation lacks that energy of, having the wisdom of running the business.
Yeah.
If we, from an inclusion inclusion perspective focus on making the Gen Zs understand business environment that they are operating in, okay, comes from sizable amount of wisdom that was developed by the baby boomers and Gen X, and so that they should, have a learning year open for these people. And simultaneously, if you go on the other side of the coin and you explain the baby boomers and the Gen X guys to understand the new strategies associated to technology, entrepreneurship, management, thought process change that is coming from the millennials and the Gen Zs of the world, I think that inclusion from a next 10-year perspective is going to be the most crucial one. And companies who stick to the concept of nationalization being inclusion and gender being inclusion for the next 10 years will have a little bit of higher trouble come talk about the concept of talent shortage. However, those organizations which focus on generational inclusivity, and when I say that, it is a given. If the talent is a male candidate or a female candidate, hire the talent. You should not be focusing on gender. So I'm not saying don't focus on, gender inclusivity. It is a given that it needs to happen, right? But I think the focus needs to shift right now. Generational inclusivity is the key. And once organizations start focusing on those particular elements, I think it is going to make a much better business sense from an DEI perspective in the future.
That's really interesting that you bring that up, Kunal, because again, we've talked about this on the podcast before. How do you really seamlessly integrate and also encourage, right, nurture a multi-generational workforce? Because it is a time of flux right now that we're seeing, and it is a very important thing to pay attention to. To pivot the conversation into another thing that's rapidly, constantly changing our world, and that is technology. We've seen how it's transformed our lives on the day-to-day. So what role do AI, automation, and also cloud-based HR platforms really play in enabling this agility that we're talking about, right, in HR functions? Whether it's real-time decision-making or flexible workforce management, is it different? Are there more unique strategies in the Middle East that need to be applied?
So I'll break this up into two segments. First, we'll talk about a little bit on AI, and then we'll talk about the flexibility part of it. Okay.
Yeah.
In the artificial intelligence world, it started off with a massive bang because there were limited players in back, and everybody thought that this is it. We have artificial intelligence right now. Then many technological interventions have happened where many brands, many organizations have started creating their own artificial intelligence portal. There would be more than 100 right now in the market, and I would have had used maybe around 20 or 22 at the moment in terms of experimenting with them. All right. I personally believe as time is going by, artificial intelligence, the way it is getting developed right now, it is there to support you from a transactional perspective. It is quite possible tomorrow, in the future, okay, it may do much more from an intelligence perspective. But at the moment, artificial intelligence from a prompt perspective, whether it is generative AI or whether it is an agentic AI perspective, is able to solve your transactional elements. I personally believe the most important element is, let's say I have got 30 team members in my team today, right? And in a span of 2 years time, I want to implement 7 agentic AIs and work with 23 human portfolios in my team. All right.
Right.
What is going to be crucial is not how I only implement agentic AI, because I know what the agentic AI will do for me in 2 years time. What difference does that agentic AI incorporation brings into the remaining 23 people? Okay. I think that is the most crucial thing, because like we say, if a manager becomes a leader tomorrow or an HOD tomorrow, but continues to do the same job as a manager, then what kind of leader have we developed in an organization? Similarly, after incorporating AI and taking away your transactions, if the remaining 23 people are doing the same thing, okay, then what is the use of having an AI? And hence, I personally believe, and I think I just spoke some time back as well, that there is a mental process reorganizing that first needs to happen before any organization ventures into an AI. If you enter into the zone of AI and incorporate these technologies in your organization just because you think it is like an in thing, like a salsa class or a Zumba class tomorrow, then it's going to create process mapping issues in your organization. So I think before implementation, it might sound really great thing to do or an in thing to do, or you may have a FOMO of being left out because some other organization is doing it and you're not. I would say don't follow anybody. First, look at your own organization, your own processes, evaluate what your people are doing, where AI can come into picture, and when AI comes into picture, and when your existing employees get released from those transactional processes, how transforming can they become from your process mapping perspective to do something very unique, very different that benefits the profitability quotient of your organization. So that is one perspective to look at it.
Right.
From a flexibility perspective, I think I come from a retail supermarket, backend now since last 15 years. Who would have thought that we would have a hybrid organization ever for that matter? But look at COVID. COVID came in, everything got changed slowly and gradually. And, today Choithrams is working on a hybrid context where if an employee wants to work from home, maybe a couple of days in a week or one day in a week, they can do so. Concept of comp off and all those things. I think industry to industry, organization needs to evaluate what works best for them. If we look at, some specifics associated to countries outside Middle East, I will not take names of the organization, but there are some banks who are offering flexibilities even right now after COVID. And some banks are saying that, no, we want our employees to come back. I think every business is different and pretty unique in its own way. If I'm in a retail organization and let's say a supermarket organization, there is another supermarket which may exactly look like same, but I can't implement their policies in my organization. We have to assess what is our culture, what is our background, how old we are, how vintage we probably have been, and changing mindsets and changing perspectives will determine what kind of flexibilities you will have. I think whatever flexibilities you plan, think about a structure where how your processes get impacted with those flexibilities. Because if I launch something right now and it is a half-baked approach and a thought process, and tomorrow 6 months down the line, if I have to snatch those flexibilities back from the organization, there would be a mental disruption amongst the employees and the engagement quotient will suffer. So any policy that you wish to implement, whether it is a hybrid policy or whether it is an absolute remote policy for certain level of employees, you need to do your homework in a way where you stick to that particular plan for a certain amount of time, maybe a year or two, if you change anything. And I hope that does not change because, when you offer a flexibility and you have to snatch that flexibility away from people, and it may be a good reason for all anyone cares, but I think the hierarchies in the organization determine one very clear thing, Ahalya, that every level in the organizational does not have the same maturity. And you need to be very, very careful as an HR professional or as a CXO in the organization. Before implementing a policy, you should think about that particular element.
No, absolutely. And I think we've seen in the recent years that, there is no one size fits all scenario or solution for any organization, right? And more often than not, if you're going to borrow policies and just sort of copy paste them into your context, it's hardly ever going to work, which is why it's so important for HR professionals to really occupy the space that they have the opportunity to occupy, which is this strategic role, and identify, what works best for them, because they are kind of the people who can see the ecosystem for what it is, right? So in a rapidly changing environment, I think continuous learning is also key, both on part of the HR professionals managing change, professionals working within the organization. So how can HR create, agile learning ecosystems to continuously upskill their professionals and also future-proof the talent pipeline in the Middle East? Kunal, I think that's a really important aspect of all of this, right?
Right, absolutely. So I think the core essence of learning and development is that we start understanding business structure as a whole. If you do training in the organization just to tick boxes and create a structure or a dashboard to say that I have completed training for, let's say, X number of people. So, and these X number of people have completed X number of hours. I think that is a cookie cutter approach then in that case. I think L&D as a domain needs to get into customization, and customization will only happen when they understand the holistic perspective of what the business has to offer to its external customers, right? So anything that we do in HR, including learning and development, more importantly in the next 5 years or so, should be associated to understanding how my employee impacts the external customer, how my product that I sell impacts the external customer, the processes that I tend to have in my organization to create that product. How could it, enhance the relationship quotient, or how could it build credibility if I announce that to my external customer? When I have this kind of holistic understanding, I start working very closely with the business heads to create those kind of learning programs. And you won't believe when something like this happens, there is so much of support that business operations provides the learning and development team in content development itself.
Right.
So to give you an example, back in the day, we have created management development programs. They were in-house programs where, let's take retail as an example, and even distribution and supply chain as an example. All these three HODs have come together to work with learning and development teams in our organization. And they have supported not only to create the right content, which would deliver, an overall holistic understanding to our shop floor level employees and trainees, but they also ended up participating because they very genuinely believe that for this kind of operational content, I think they would do better justice than even an L&D person. So what we have done is we have created a mixed bag of a training program in an M&D LNDB, where we coach, rather the operational guys will coach on the operational content, and the L&D team will focus on the behavioral competencies perspective, right? So you create a functional essence in your L&D domain, all right? And that way, imagine so much of data input comes in with regards to what kind of coaching programs are really required. Where are our people lagging in the organization? Who are the innovators in the organization? This concept clubbed with the personal development areas that are, embodied in the performance appraisal template. You club these and there is a wealth of data and information that L&D team can create, which eventually is going to support, the future in an amazing way. And I personally believe that rather than having no training at all in the organization, a one-day training is much, much better. But those organizations which are going to invest in L&D in the next 5 years are significantly going to have a much better P&L compared to those who don't.
Correct, right. No, I think those are some valuable points, and it is a very important area right now, focus area that everybody should be paying attention to. And Kunal, before I ask you the final question, just one off the cuff, right? Like you said, you've seen the organization really transition the landscape, right? The workforce landscape, and watch it really become a very dynamic one. What is, according to you, the biggest opportunity right now that you think HR professionals in the Middle East especially can really seize, to make a difference and have a meaningful impact?
That's a tricky one. Okay. I think in my personal opinion, this is something that I would do, and I'll leave it to our listeners to assess, how their priorities are. I think every organization, like we have discussed earlier, is different. So are their challenges, and so are their solutions and their perspectives.
Right.
I think I have touched based on my answer to this question sometime back in our discussion when I talk about the holistic perspective of business. I think HR business partnering is a misconstrued domain altogether, the way I look at it from a market perspective. We talk about being a business partner, but we don't necessarily understand business. And I'll give you a classic example. When I was working with Choithrams in my initial days, which is back in 2010 when I joined the company, I never had retail and distribution exposure prior to that. I come from aviation and ITES and BFSI domain. And here I walk into Choithrams, which is a retail and supermarket and a distribution FMCG organization. Before joining Choithrams, I have been to a supermarket or a hypermarket multiple times when I was in India. But I never understood standing in a queue where there were 10 people ahead of me, why this is taking so much time. So I may be one of the customers who used to crib standing in a long queue. But when I come into this kind of an organization, I need to start going on the other side of the POS machine, point of sale machine, to understand what is the role of a cashier. And when I go on the other side, okay, and there are so many challenges in that small space that I get to identify, basis which I will develop an HR intervention for my organization, my people, my culture. I will create a value proposition in the organization basis my people, my process, my culture. And that's how it becomes a custom process. And when you follow a custom process, that's where you become a true HR business partner. Now, I'm just giving you example of this one cashier. Imagine in a retail organization, there are so many designations. Every designation will at least have at least one unique challenge.
Yeah.
Do we have an assessment of that one unique challenge of each designation in our organization when we call ourselves the HR business partner? If the answer is no, then you are an HR business partner on paper, not in real terms. So only and only if you stress. So if I have to give one recommendation, take all the designations in your organization, try and find at least one unique challenge that each designation has to offer. And trust me, if you are an individual HR business partner, it will at least take 2 years for you to solve everything. And by the time you solve everything, you will have new challenges as well, by the way.
Yeah. And that's where the agile strategies come into play, right? It keeps you agile as well.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
yes, technology and all those perspectives are always going to be there to support you.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have an assessment of these areas, you'll be able to use those technologies better and in your field.
100%. And I think that's an opportunity that many people will side with you on. So don't worry about it. And finally, Kunal, how do you think HR can cultivate leaders who don't only thrive in uncertainty, but also promote a culture, right, of adaptability, innovation, collaboration throughout the organization? I think one thing always remains constant is that so much of the important change that needs to happen within an organization starts at the top, right? And it really does trickle down. So as someone who is in a leadership position yourself as CHRO, how do you think, that approach, that mindset, should be socialized within extended leadership?
I would always suggest on a very simple base level, I would say, please have a coffee meeting at least once in a month with all your HODs. And sometimes if you find somebody who's a difficult customer to crack, call them for lunch or dinner outside the organization, because the office environment is maybe not suiting both the parties to have appropriate communication in the organization. But you need to take the lead. That is number one. Once you do something like this, you start entering into a personal relationship zone with people. It may sound very kiddish to you when I say this, but knowing sometimes a personal background of a person, if the person is married or not, do they have children or not, where their children study, what is their daily routine like as a family member?
Yeah.
You tend to connect on a personal level with people where if the other person now has a challenge in process, they reach out to you without even thinking or blinking. And I think that internal confidence and a connect enhances the communication quotient within the organization. So we can have great e-query portals where an HOD or a team member can go and log in a query and it will come to you. You can take 2 days because you have 2 days in the organization basis your e-query portal. But sometimes, this whole concept of personal communication is so amazing. It may sound old school, but it is amazing where people come to me or they pick up the phone and call me and they tell me, Kunal, I'm facing this particular challenge. How can we sort this? And by the virtue of me being where I am in the organization, or if I've delegated certain authority to my team members, they can use that authority to sort that issue on the call itself. Right. And I think that's where relationships are built. If you're using too much technology where your relationship is getting distorted in a way, try and find out those particular gaps and, use technology wisely. A beautiful experience to use technology. There's no doubt about it. But don't let relationships create a crack somewhere over there where people cannot communicate with each other. And I think communication is the biggest challenge in spite of new institutions coming in spite of new certifications coming into the market. I think communication broadly remains a much bigger challenge. The more easily and conveniently we are able to build relationships, that is going to create the beauty in how you communicate with your team members. And when communication enhances in an organization, I think you discuss your problems left, right, center. You will not necessarily have a solution to all the questions that people have. I mean, that's the plight of an HR person at times. You may ask people to wait. It's fine. But I follow one technique in my life, which I'll share with you and the listeners today, Ahalya. I believe if there is something that I can finish off in 2 minutes to 10 minutes, I will do it immediately, unless I'm into an activity. But if I'm sitting free and I have to, let's say, as simple as, complete one file which is right there in front of me, and it is going to take not more than 5 minutes, I will not keep it and pile up activities like this where I say that, oh my goodness, there is so much work remaining in my life. Yeah. If you follow this kind of a strategy, you will have a lot of time for yourself and you will have a lot of time to communicate with people, because you can't even imagine how much I have benefited from this very simple philosophy of finishing activities immediately, which can be finished within 2 to 10 minutes. And I think that has given me time to just walk into people's office, just tell them, hi, how are you doing? Just want to catch up with you without any agenda. I think they smile at me, they feel good about it, and that helps them reach out to me whenever they have a challenge.
That's amazing, Kunal. And I think, like you said, very simple strategy, but something we can implement in our day to day. And I must thank you for giving us more than your 2 to 10 minutes on today's episode. It's really been a pleasure exploring all of these different facets, because different geographies do present very unique challenges, opportunities. It's a very interesting space right now in the Middle East. So I'm glad we could really dive into it and get your perspective on it. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Like I said earlier, thank you so much for having me on board. It has been an absolute honor. I just hope whatever we have discussed, it impacts at least a little percentage of people outside, and I'll be very happy if that happens.
Absolutely. I'm sure it will. And, to all of our listeners, thank you so much for joining in. These conversations that we have on greytFM, I think so often speak to the need for transformation and evolution, right? And that immediately calls us back to the Great to Great campaign that we've got going on here at Greyt HR. We're already on the right track. We're following the right direction, doing all of the right things, and we're good. But what does it take to become exceptional? And that's really what our campaign talks about, right? It's about transformation that businesses experience when they move from simple, conventional HR solutions to a more comprehensive, seamless, and impactful approach with Greyt HR. And I think so much of that relates to what Kunal has talked about in today's episode, which is to really integrate technology, integrate people solutions in the most effective way possible. So if you're interested, make sure to keep an eye out for that, because you can take your organization from great to great with Great HR. Thank you so much, everybody, for being with us on today's episode. And we'll be back with some more interesting conversation very soon. June really has been the gift that keeps on giving and it's not going to stop. So stay safe and stay happy. We'll catch you later.
This is Great FM, a podcast series by Great HR. Produced by Timber Media.